how many of you, this is your first tour with us with the Historical Society? Okay, well, we're very happy to have several of our lanyarded library friends here, and I'm sure they will be happy to introduce themselves, but we want to recognize Christy Trent, who is not only a dedicated library employee, but a local legend in Miamisburg.
Awesome person. I write an article that's in the Miamisburg News too, that talks about the library and stuff. So.
Well, there you go. And I'm sure sometime this morning you will be passing out library calendars for those of us who don't get hit by this vehicle.
All right.
That's the most dangerous part of the tour, okay? Once we get out of the alley here. By the way, while we are here in the alley, you are standing in the area that would have been the Miami and Erie Canal. So we're going to be talking about the front side of the buildings, but if you look down the back side of the building, you'll see a lot of these second story or taller buildings have doors at that level, and that's where the winch would have lowered. That's the mechanical device, not a woman of ill repute. Would have lowered their products, mostly tobacco, into the canal boats for delivery wherever the canal was going. But one interesting thing, we'll talk about this quite a bit this morning. This was an area that was really good for growing tobacco at one time. Probably here downtown, but this was settled. A lot of the farms were across the river, and as I've said, I think I've told this story 35 times, so here's 36. All the years I smoked, I didn't know there were different kinds of tobacco, but we grew cigar and pipe tobacco here. We did not grow cigarette tobacco, which is one of the reasons why our tobacco business did not last really past the 1960s. Now, there was a tobacco warehouse just a few doors down, which we'll get to in a little bit. And, hey Josh, wave. Josh Fox, one of the descendants of the Foxes, early founders of the city. Now, his father told me a story, so it must be true, that they used to go around behind the garbage cans behind the tobacco, the cigar factory, and they would pull out the broken cigars and sneak and smoke them for free. So the tobacco business funded some juvenile delinquencies. All right, so we're going to start here at the Lawyers Building. We are going to be talking. Is anyone here an attorney? Okay, so we can speak freely. All right, we start with lawyers. Near the end of the tour, we talk about some other lawyers, and but I promise you, it's not all dark and dreary and legal stuff. We do talk about other people who are fun and exciting and did not pass the bar. Well, in Miamisburg, there were plenty of people that didn't pass the bar. They walked right in. Okay, so the Lawyers Building here, to start off, was at one time two separate businesses. And the business that was in this side of the building here was a steam laundry business. Now, that may not seem like such a good idea now, but across the street here was where the Baum House Hotel was, B-A-U-M. There's the Baum Opera House, obviously. He used to have a hotel here, and before that, Charles Baum was an employee and then the manager of the Miami House Hotel, which is where Jane's on Main is now. And then there was also the Washington House, which was where the Plaza Theater is now. There was the Mansion House that was up the street, long gone now since the 1870s. And then if we look, as we're going around the corner here, you'll see a red building there where the roof is being repaired, and that was the Cress House. So there were several hotels here. Now the good thing about the Baum House Hotel is if you stayed there, he provided carriage rides from the railroad station across the street, so you didn't have to lug your baggage across the river. You could ride in the carriage. So that was kind of a nice perk. But all of these buildings were severely damaged during the flood, because where we're standing now would have been under about 8 to 10 feet of water. And of course, it wasn't standing water; it was rushing through here. When the levee broke in Dayton, about 10 trillion, that's trillion, gallons of water flowed in from the swollen rivers because, I mean, it still happens now, but back then we didn't have the levee system. So everything was frozen, then it thawed really quickly, then it froze again, then it rained really hard, and so the ground couldn't hold all the water, and it flowed into all the rivers, which were not dammed up at the time. So all that water flowed into Dayton, and it flowed down the Miami River, and the river narrows, of all things, south of Dayton. And then when we get here to Miamisburg, south of town, the Big Four Railroad, when they built their trestle across what became Old 25, they had a big embankment that created kind of a funnel, and it blocked up with all of the debris and everything that was coming down from Dayton and points north. And so there were some people who were talking about getting in their cars. Now this is 1913, so it would have probably been an open vehicle. They were going to drive up the Centerville Pike to buy some dynamite and blow the bridge, because the water was also flooding back north as well as coming from the north. So we got hit about as bad in the 1913 flood as any city that suffered any damage. There were newspaper reports that Miamisburg was wiped off the map. It was not. It was just really soggy and muddy. But as we come around the front of the building here, and we're not always going to be in the sun, but for a little bit. Even if that isn't 100% accurate, it's pretty close. So, I mean, the river is 2 blocks this way, so you can imagine what kind of water was coming down through here. Now, so that's this side of the building. This side of the building at one time was owned by one of our many fraternal organizations, the Star City Council number 277 of the Junior Order of United American Mechanics. Has anybody ever heard of that one? Yeah, they're long gone. But at one time, the Knights of Pythias had a lot of members here. Of course, the Odd Fellows had a lot of members here. The Lions, the Rotary, the Eagles, the Moose. What am I missing? Of course, the Masons, who are still here. But every fraternal organization had members here in town, and they all had meetings here in town. So this was a time when... Anybody here a Rotarian? Every time I ask that question, I don't know why we're not drawing any of the Rotary people here. Anyway, the Rotary met on Wednesday at lunch. Does anybody know why? They still meet at Wednesday at lunch. It's because the banks would close at 3 o'clock or at noon on Wednesdays, keeping bankers hours, right? We all know that expression. And so the businessmen couldn't go to the bank and do any business. So that's when they would have their meeting, because they were free in the afternoon. So there you go. All right, so now this is the lawyer's building, and it's appropriately painted gray and black. Because it's a lawyer, come on. That's the first lawyer joke of the day. There may be more. Let's go around the corner here. Is there anybody here who remembers Star City soft drinks? Okay, there's a big soda pop company here right in Miamisburg from about the 1920s until the late 60s, when the big companies, Coke, Pepsi, RC, just put them out of business. They couldn't compete. But you see this domed building here that's gray behind here. That was the original location for Star City Bottling. And later they moved up the street behind what was the post office. You can kind of see the carriage house there through the behind that stop sign there, and that's where the Star City Bottling Company was for many years. They had the first one of those of the day too. They had orange, they had cream soda, they had lemon cola. So they had the full gamut of any soft drink flavor you'd want. Now, right here on the corner used to be a gas station, but Fox Motors has been here since, well, before it was Fox Motors, they've only been Fox Motors for 111 years. Before then, they were a carriage business, but it was after the flood, and there is a photo. This would have been where the original firehouse was in the city building across from us, and it was severely damaged because, you know, all the flood water came through. There's a photo taken from over here going this direction, and it shows that the whole front end of the Fox business was torn off by the flood waters, and there was mud and everything. Of course, the streets weren't really paved all over town. They were paved on Main Street first and then working back this way. So it was a muddy mess. But it was around that time that Mr. Fox decided, I don't want to hassle with all this horse business. I want to start selling motor cars. And they've sold a number of different models here, Studebakers, Hudsons. The story goes, and I heard this again from Tim Fox, so it's got to be true, that Walter Chrysler himself came down from Detroit and said to Mr. Fox, why don't you start selling my cars? And so they were a Chrysler dealership for many, many years. Now, in the early days of the business, and I really encourage all of you, if you get a chance, stop in Fox Motors, talk to Tim, talk to Josh. They've got kind of another smaller Miamisburg museum in there. And the freight elevator is still functioning that's inside this building because it's been a dealership for that long. But what they would do is they would take a wagon over to the railroad depot at 4th Street. They would pick up a crate and they would bring it back here, take it up to the 2nd floor, open the box, and that had all the parts of the car. They would assemble the vehicle, put it back on the elevator, and bring it down to the showroom, and that's how they got their vehicles. I think that's really cool. So the elevator's still there. One of Tim Fox's ancestors built a tractor that Henry Ford was very interested in. That is here. It's one of the first, you have to really talk to him. It's a fascinating story. I just don't remember all of it right now. So anyhow, Fox Motors has been here as Fox Motors for, well, since just after the 1913 flood. Now the other business that is still here since the 1913 flood is very famous in Miamisburg.
Hamburger wagon.
The hamburger wagon. Mr. Porter was making, he was cooking his hamburgers, his secret recipe hamburgers for the Red Cross and the National Guard and for all the people who were working cleaning up the city. And afterwards he started the business, which is still going today. So, and about the time the tours open, I think the hamburger wagon, that's another place to go eat. Where are our restaurant friends? That's another place to eat in Miamisburg. Okay, questions about anything so far?
Let's do our little plug. The library.
Really?
Want to do? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. We're with the Miamisburg Library, and we do a lot of our stuff with Ken also. We got several more coming up. There's a cemetery tour up in Hillgrove Cemetery.
I'm not going out there.
And
During the day or night?
it's during
It's
the
during
day.
the day,
It's
yeah.
not a ghost tour because we're respectful of the
Alright.
cemeteries. But
Am I
this young lady also wanted to introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Sophia. I'm a library aide at the library, so I'm less official than Christy. I'm still excited to be here. I'm a history student too, so this is an enjoyable little trek for me. I want to be here.
So we have lots of databases, all kinds of stuff for people to use in the library. If you want to look up history, genealogy, all kinds of things. I'm kind of like a little bit of an expert on it. Ken's wife works down in the history department at the main library, and she's a pretty big expert on it. So if you guys ever have genealogy questions and different things, you can come in the library and we can help you out. So please come. And then this gentleman.
I'm Alvin. I handle all the social media for the Day Metro Libraries, so you can often catch me
So you're from downtown?
out from downtown.
Look
so
at that.
I'm at the
Look at that,
Job
Jake.
Center, the main library as
I
well.
know.
And then you can catch me bouncing around from branch to branch at a lot of our events, taking photos and uploading to our social media.
Okay. Will make us all look young and thin and attractive,
Yeah,
okay?
unfit and attractive.
Go to the next building, which is the first of our tobacco buildings. of several tobacco warehouses at one time. As I said, the tobacco business was a big deal, as well as the cigar business. And hundreds of people were employed in this. If you know anything about tobacco, it's pretty labor intensive, so it takes a lot of people to grow it and then dry it and do all the stuff that they do with it. As I said, I was only a consumer, so I don't know anything about the business end of it. So this building, and before it was painted, some of the original paint was up here, but it was a later name. It wasn't the Tedigan Brothers Leaf Tobacco Warehouse that it says here in the book. And the family also built a second warehouse on South 3rd Street, but strangely enough, the tobacco building burnt down, so we don't have that anymore. Now, Tedig, interestingly enough, became the first president of the Farmers and Merchants Bank, which has been around with us for 100 years. So, and that's over here on 1st Street. Originally, it was on Main Street, but they built that building 100 years ago, or about 70 years ago. Okay, so this was the Gastineau building. It's been the home of Denart Frigidaire, the Round Table Restaurant, Kitchen by Castle. There have been beauty shops here, a dance studio, and a senior citizens center. And if you know, now the senior center is over on Central Avenue, so we've made our seniors move all over downtown. Okay, it says now it's called the East Canal Building. Okay. Now, up until recently, the Watermark restaurant was here, but that unfortunately is no longer here. However, Sushi Nero is here, and whatever your opinions are about sushi, they have other stuff on the menu, so it's really worth going. Very good restaurant. And the entrance is off of the canal side, so it's on the other side. Now, this building next to it. This moment of silence brought to you by the Baltimore and Ohio. All right, let's move to the next building now. Now, I don't know where any of the other locations are, but welcome to the Historical Driving Tour location number 29. Nobody remembers when this tour was here or where any of the other places were on the tour, but this one was 29. Whenever that was. And why they left the sign up here, I don't know. This building is one of the first buildings in Miamisburg, and it has been moved as people were likely to do back then. They didn't just tear a building down and build something new. They would pick it up, put it on a cart of some kind, and move it where they wanted it. That was the case with this building. I think originally it would have been over on like 1st Street, which is, you know, this is 2nd Street, a block over from here, but in that direction. And then right where the city building is now was somewhere close to the site of the first cemetery in Miamisburg. So now the thing about cemeteries, I mean, obviously they put the canal through there, so they had to move their grandparents somewhere else, and they moved the cemetery to what is now Veterans Memorial Park, which was called Library Park. Before then it was called City Park. Now the problem with that is, and we're going to talk about a few funeral homes today. The problem with moving a cemetery, it's not what you think. First of all, the city, well, the village at the time, doesn't pay for you to move your relatives. You had to pay for that yourself. So if you were relatively well off, you could pay for your relative to be disinterred. You'd bring the tombstone, you'd put them in the new location, you would have a plot there, you would rebury them, you'd put the headstone up. If you didn't have enough money, you just picked up the headstone, left grandma where she was, and moved the headstone off to the new plot. So my point is, there were probably some city founders who were left in the first cemetery. Just like, I don't know if you heard the famous story about when they were putting in the fountain in the 60s in Library Park. As they were bringing the water pipe along under the trees there on this side of the building, they hit a metal casket of someone who'd been buried in that cemetery and had not been, I guess they lost track of him. I don't know how they kept records back then, but it was what's called a Fisk casket. It's a metal frame, you know, it looks like a sarcophagus, but it's made out of metal. And there was a glass window on the front of the casket so you could look down and see the guy. Now again, a friend of mine, so I know it's a true story, remembers when he was in school and they had the casket over at Bell Memorial over South Main Street, and he said there was a line of his friends every day after school going through there and looking at that guy who was, you know, arms crossed like this, had the frilled sleeves. You know, he was obviously prosperous because the Fisk caskets were custom made. Well, I mean, a lot of caskets were custom made, but this was metal, so it was a little more expensive. But I don't know that we ever found out who the guy was, because again, records weren't as good, and he had been unfortunately left in the cemetery. Yeah, there was a whole newspaper article. You have that in the library archives.
Another plug for the library. In October, we do a ghost walk, and it's in the Veterans Park, and we talk about different ghost stories that go on there. But I talk a lot about the Fisk casket and where it was found. We had somebody point us out like the exact spot. We know where it was, but he's buried. They reburied him up on the.
Yeah, they didn't leave him at Bell Memorial. Okay, I mean, he has
He's up at Highland Cemetery.
And unlike some of our ancestors, he did get actually moved and reburied in the cemetery, not just his tombstone.
Yeah.
So.
And I have
Thank
pictures.
goodness.
I have lots of pictures actually of the casket and that I showed.
Anyway, so speaking of moving the cemetery from First Street, speaking of moving buildings, now we're back here to our, what was the first schoolhouse in Miamisburg, but again, it would have been a couple blocks this way. And so half of the building was run by the Lutheran Church and half of the building was run by the German Reformed Church. That's fine, right? Now, there were a number of reasons. Both congregations were growing past the size that they could manage in this building. But also, one of the reasons why they split, and again, a minor reason, but a reason nonetheless, is that the German Reformed Church did not care for the fact that the Lutherans served wine for communion. So they couldn't abide by that. So that's another reason why they split off. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Trinity Church, and that is actually the fourth building that was there. Thank goodness it's still there. But we'll also talk a little bit about our friends at St. Jacob's. So we will get to those churches here in a little bit. But they did start out in a building like this. This is where they had their school and their services. Now the German Reformed initially were services in German. And in fact, that was usually a requirement, at least for the Lutheran Church, that the minister do a service in German. And there was one minister who came to town and actually had to learn German so that he could preach. Does anyone know why or what stopped German church services in Miamisburg?
World War II.
First World War. I knew you would have the answer. It's like you just work in a library or something. All right. Questions about our building here? Now, this is one of our other hotels. I don't know if I mentioned it. It's not really, we don't have as much information about this building, but this was the Hamilton House. And it was a hotel. Obviously, I mean, you can see it wasn't very big. Now it is apartments upstairs and an unbelievably good Mexican restaurant downstairs. Really, really. How many of us have been to the Mexican restaurant? Am I right? It's fantastic. Using the original recipes that John Treon brought from Pennsylvania. No. Okay, let's go on down here and head for some shade. Okay, now there used to be houses along here. In fact, William, or not William Ryder, well, he would have been just a new man, but Reverend Isaac Ryder had a house somewhere in this area, which has been torn down. Reverend Isaac Ryder, of course, was the minister of the German Reformed Church, and he was a ferociously passionate anti-alcohol, pro-temperance. I know, in Miamisburg. Can you believe it? Just so you know, I made a mistake when I'd also do the Main Street tour, and we started the parking lot over by Ron's Pizza, and we go down to Jane's on Main. So in that one block, I was telling people who came on the tour, you know, at one time there were 30 bars through here in that one block. And then somebody stepped up and said, no, you're not right, there were only 29. So, even, now you can see if your house is here, Main Street is there, and one of the things that Isaac Ryder would write at length in capital letters in his diary was how he didn't like the Saturday night carousing in the ale houses around here. And so he sounded just like his several generations later when we had the discussion about having a Dora district here in Miamisburg. Oh, there's going to be a bunch of drunks running around. It's going to ruin our property value. No, it didn't ruin the property value at all. It's just you don't get arrested for having an open container. It's Miamisburg. You know, all the churches were down in Franklin, and all the bars were up here, and there was a canal between. So you sinned on Saturday, and then you floated down the canal to repent on Sunday. Okay, not a big church crowd? Okay. All right, let's go. See, because the church was down, and they had a temperance league in Franklin. Sons of Temperance was the name. It was a fraternal organization, because for many years the Masons were considered to be, well, that's a whole other long story, but they created a side organization under the Sons of Temperance, which was very, very similar to the Masons, but it wasn't a Mason. It wasn't a Masonic organization. And then once the heat was taken off of being a Mason, then suddenly they had this upsurge in membership of their Masonic lodge. What a coincidence. Okay, so let us go down to the stop sign, and we'll talk about another one of our businesses here in town. Now it is one of the Alcor locations, but they own several of the old warehouses down the street, painted in their characteristic green. At one time, this was owned by James Havemeyer, who, what do you know, was a tobacco agent. And in 1886, this was the Havemeyer and Vigalius Tobacco Warehouse. And this is another one of those buildings that has the second story door with the crane and everything to lower onto the who's that?
Admirers.
Friendly people. Okay, so as it says here, over 600 people were employed in this area. Now that's Miamisburg proper plus Miami Township. And then this was also a pork house at one time where pork sausage was made. And then it was the Weiser warehouse, and then it was a print shop that was owned by McNabb Paper Company. There were several paper companies in Miamisburg at one time, and we talk about this more on the Millionaires Road Tour, which is going this way. But sons married prosperous businessmen's daughters, and then either went into that business or started out in that business and started their own business. One of our prominent early businessmen, Hoover, Daniel Hoover, had a business where he licensed the Excelsior reaping machine, which was the machine that wrapped twine around crops. Originally they were using wire, but they found that twine obviously is much more affordable to use and easier to work with. And so there was also a twine making company in town. There was a carriage company in town, and all of these guys either knew each other, or they married into each other's families, or they were, members of fraternal organizations together, or they went to the same church. So they were all interconnected with one another, as well as the doctors and other business people in town. So, just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so we also had a paper business here because you're right on the canal, right on the river, so you could generate. And we're going to talk about the old Peerless Mill here in a little bit. Anybody remember going to the Peerless Mill? Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? Have you been to Star City Brewery since then? A few of us? Okay. I'm going to count on you here in just a few minutes, all right? All right. Let us bravely travel across Linden Avenue here.
And people vandalized it badly.
People vandalized it. How many of you have been to Lucky Star Brewing? How many of us are Miamisburg people? How many of you are here from out of town? Okay, Centerville, yeah. Clear on the other side of the interstate. Okay, this building and this building over here, this string of buildings here, was part of the Miamisburg, I'm going to say this right, Binder, Twine, and Cordage Company. Now there was also another factory, if you know, as you go across the Sycamore Street Bridge going across the river, right there on the right at the traffic light, that was also a twine company. Now interestingly enough, and we have this photo in the Historical Society, in 1900, vice presidential candidate Teddy Roosevelt was on a whistle-stop tour. If you know anything about Teddy Roosevelt and anything he did in his life until his last couple years, he went at it with incredible energy and enthusiasm, and he crisscrossed the country for the re-election of President McKinley, who was also from Ohio. And we have a photo. You can't really see Roosevelt that well, but he's across the river at that cordage company giving a speech to a group of people, and then he would have just jumped back on the train and headed off to his next location. But again, if you've read his biography, you know he traveled tens of thousands of miles on the rails and of course horseback or however he could get there to campaign for William McKinley. Does anybody know how the 1900 election went? McKinley won substantially, yeah. And then they put Roosevelt in as vice president because they thought, this guy's crazy, we'll put him in a spot where he won't do any harm. And then September of 1901, McKinley was assassinated, Teddy Roosevelt became president. And then we all said, hey, where's that picture we had of him from last year where he was over there at the cordage factory? Yeah, look at that. And of course then, you know, history was made. All right, so now this is Lucky Star, and from what I understand, if you go upstairs, and we have a new owner here of this building, but if you go upstairs, there's graffiti on the walls of all the people who have worked here, and people who have been up there since, initials and people doing math. I guess they were adding up something they were working on, and they just drew it on the wall, but there's all kinds of graffiti upstairs. I've not seen it yet, but I would like to get up there and see that.
This is a restaurant now?
What's that?
This is a restaurant now?
It is one of our
And brewery.
3 breweries.
Blue Ridge.
So we are bringing back.
There's lots of ghost stories about this place.
Okay, I don't think that was.
They'll say they open at 11.
Is it 11 right now?
11:08.
Till after.
Oh, perfect.
They're like, people want to get in. They heard
Okay,
it.
well, I thought someone was going to walk out and, you know, but anyway. Yes, this is a brewery and a restaurant. Good food, good atmosphere. They have different drinks as well as their beers that they are continually changing recipes and coming up with new ones. Very interesting place to go. But originally this was a binder and twine company, and the guy who built this house right here, Thomas Bernard Lyons, was one of the presidents of the company as well as probably one of the financiers, since he was also one of the guys who started one of our first banks here in town. And yes, the house with the turret. Now, He was mayor of Miamisburg in either the 1850s or the 1870s, so you get kind of an idea of. And then his son was also Thomas Bernard Lyons Jr., cleverly named. He was also mayor of Miamisburg, but unfortunately he was elected in 1912, so he would have been the mayor during the flood. So I can imagine what the city council meetings were like for that 6-week period. And there was martial law here in town, so if you were out after dark, the Ohio National Guard would probably shoot you. So it was a bad time and lots of damage here. Okay, moving down the street a little bit. Okay, so they sell restaurant and business supplies as well as, I guess, well, chilies. That's pretty cool. This was the last tobacco warehouse in Miamisburg. And this is probably one of those places where the truant young, I'll say the young men of Miamisburg used to dig through the trash cans to get the broken cigars so they could smoke for free. Not saying that any of us from any generation wouldn't have done the same thing. Actually, one block over on 3rd Street, one of our other old warehouses and where the Reaper Company used to be, that was at one time a toy factory where they made cast iron toys. Same thing. Kids used to go through the trash cans and pull out the broken toys and fix them so they would get toys for free. So very industrious young people here a couple generations ago. All right, so this building has been several things, but it's primarily known for tobacco. And after World War I, our soldiers returning home were used to smoking French cigarettes, and so that's the kind of tobacco they wanted to smoke. We don't grow that here, so our tobacco business kind of went under, as well as that inconvenient Surgeon General's warning many years later. Now, it was just brought to my attention, what is today? Today, 20th?
Yeah.
Okay. Sophia, get ready. Today, June 28th, 1914. Anybody? The Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated as he made his way through Sarajevo. If you've ever seen any documentaries about this, the guy who shot both him and his wife was just using a small handgun, and the fact that he could only shoot 2 shots and he hit them both and killed them, pretty amazing. I don't mean in any good way. I just mean,
I mean, the original
you know,
assassination attempt failed.
luck, I think is the word I'm thinking of.
Because they
Luck
were
up for his.
supposed to I think there were like multiple people involved, and they were supposed to throw a grenade into his carriage coach, and it failed, and a bunch of people tried to kill themselves after, and then he walked out of a sandwich shop and saw them and shot them. But a lot of the people who were a part of the assassination attempt had tuberculosis, which is why they were involved, is because they knew that they were going to die.
Something about this building, they hung tobacco in this building until the early 50s. My dad worked here on the summers during high school, and it was mainly, like you said, cigar tobacco, but whatever fell off the drying leaves while they hung, they swept it up and they made it into plug and chewing tobacco. Back in the day.
Anybody ever chewed tobacco before? I think I was the shade of this building when I tried chewing tobacco.
They used everything that came out of the building. So
Oh my goodness, including the dust off the floor.
yeah,
Delicious.
dust off the floor and the bugs.
Yeah, that's not peppercorn. That's
Ain't that
gravel.
what they do with hot dogs now?
Okay.
Throw everything left over in there.
Probably.
See?
I mean, it's
Those
industrial.
are
Yeah.
they're metal poles that go all the way through the other side of the building, because these are brick buildings. It kind of holds the building together. But coincidentally, we are known as the Star City for Lord knows what reason.
I didn't think that was the reason.
There are all kinds of stories about why we are the Star City, but I don't think any of them would really stand up to any historical scrutiny. But what's important to know is that we're the Star City now. Okay? Let's see. Speaking of Star City, let's go to Star City Brewery. Wow, what a segue.
Thanks everyone for watching the 2nd Street Tour Part 1. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe. You can also like, comment, and share. I upload videos from all kinds of events and things to do around Miamisburg and the area. Feel free to come back, check them out. I appreciate y'all for watching, and have a great one.